incentives to attract businesses here. So, but let's move on. I want to talk about housing, which is, I know, a top priority for all of you. I've heard you all talk about it. You all mentioned on your website. The Federal Reserve today came out with a report that said, we already knew that people were leaving to go to Texas or Florida or whatever, but Rhode Island, Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire all reported significant increases in the single-family homes they build and condos in May. In contrast, Massachusetts hadn't done any of that. It's just pretty comparable to what it was a year ago, which was also not much. You've all said it was a priority. Greg Schwartz, I want to start with you. The project on Needham Street, 800 units, the Northland project would have brought us 100, or will bring us 140 affordable units. When you were a city councilor, you voted against that. Given the enormity of our housing crisis, do you regret that vote?
No, Greg, I don't. And thank you for asking me. It gives me an opportunity to address this question. I think it's actually a really important vote that I would point to as an example of being a legislator who listens to everyone, who thinks about issues in a scientific, fact-based way, does not simply toe some kind of doctrine or dogmatic line, and thinks about what an actual project will do, both good and bad. And while I was the chairman of the committee during that review and did my very best, and I think most people agree that I did a very good job of maintaining comedy and keeping us on track and getting that fairly reviewed, I did my very, very best to improve the project, which was in its from the start not a transit-oriented project. I have supported every single other project because they were transit-oriented: the Trio, the Riverside, the Austin Street projects. But this project from the start was challenged by both its size and the fact that it was nearly a mile away from the T, and it was on an already congested traffic corridor. So I did my very best to improve the project, worked very hard to get the developer to address the concerns that were being raised by the community. But when, despite our very, very diligent efforts, they were unable to address those underlying concerns, I did what I'm supposed to do, which is vote against something that's not good for the city and not good for the residents. And
thank you. So Rick Lipoff, you voted for it. And I have a follow-up question to that after this one, but was your colleague wrong to vote against it? You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yes, he was wrong. And I was vice chair at that time, and I didn't know until the night of the vote that he was voting against it. And I didn't know till recently why. I think this comes down to knowledge of the real estate sector and overall planning. This project is a new neighborhood. This isn't one lot on a street front that you're adding to an area. This was a unique opportunity to plan a whole new neighborhood, several streets with supportive retail and restaurants and walkability. We have a redesign of Needham Street that's almost complete, that's going to make it even more accessible and walkable. We are not far from the T. We have a robust little transit system, a bus that's going to be going back and forth in a timely manner. We now are at a point where 40% of everybody is working from home. But let me tell you how this is different and more complicated, where you can't just say, it's not transit oriented, I'm not going for it. The neighborhood situation here, the availability of people to not get back into their cars, to go to retail, to not get back into their cars when they're home, to go to restaurants. This is a situation that is not just about, can you make it to the T, but can you stay out of your car at other times of the day in your life? So that makes this quite different than a one-off, I won't vote for it, it's not near transportation. One more thing. One more thing. I lived at Avalon on Needham Street. I lived at Avalon for a year when I was working on my home, okay? And it was a place that my wife would love to go back to because of the lifestyle, because we didn't have to get into our car. And I'll tell you this, on land use, and Greg knows this, and so does Bill, we look at the alternative. The alternative to this beautiful new neighborhood that's going to be supportive of our commercial street was a legacy place that would have brought 10 times, 20 times the amount of cars.
Okay,
And that's something we have to look at as well.
thank you. I want to follow up though. You mentioned Wells Ave, and Wells Ave was a project. It was 334 units, including 83 affordable units. People would be living there today if you did not oppose that project. You really took the lead on it. It happened to be that you live very close to it, and people were concerned that maybe it was really, you can support things unless they're in your own backyard. Help us understand why you opposed that one, and given the enormity of our housing shortage, do you regret it?
No, I don't, because it was a planning situation. With Avalon, you are putting a new neighborhood right within supportive services. Sticking the building the size of the Chestnut Hill Mall at the end of our only office park, with no restaurants, no retail, nowhere to go. You come home to the end of that street, you've got nothing. You have to get into your car to go anywhere else. You come home to Avalon or to Northland, and you walk all over the place and have everywhere to use in your life.
Okay,
Shopping,
let me stop you there.
Yeah.
Bill Humphrey, was Greg Schwartz wrong about Northland? Was Rick Lipoff wrong about Wells Ave?
I can't really speak to the details of Wells Ave, as that was further before my time. I agreed with the points that Councillor Lipoff just made about the Northland project. I certainly disagree with Councillor Schwartz's vote on this, and I know that there's a lot of differences of opinion in my ward, in Ward 5, and specifically in Upper Falls, about this project, and I respect and understand those differences. I did think this was an appropriate project. Not only is it one of the most environmentally sort of innovative projects that's been done in the country, and is going to bring a huge amount of housing and affordable housing, specifically, as you mentioned, Greg Reedman. As Councillor Lipoff said, the other thing here is we're not only thinking about, what are the benefits to the neighborhood, the investment in this economically depressed area that's had for decades a lot of disinvestment and things leaving. It's also what are the alternatives that could have gone there. This was not somebody that bought a property speculatively to see what they could do with it. This was the same property owner for decades owning this. They could basically do almost anything they wanted with it within the parameters of, what was permitted there and what was zoned for there. And what was zoned for there was probably going to be something more like a superstore of some kind, that, or a legacy place type thing, as Councillor Lipoff said, that would have been vastly more traffic. The other thing is, when you have an environmentally contaminated site like both of the Northland properties at the end of Needham Street, it is very difficult and expensive to do almost anything with it unless you are also going to be doing a pretty significant project involving excavation of the soil for underground parking garages and so forth. So we were able to kill a lot of birds with one stone by doing this project. I understand it had some limitations, but we've got to build 200,000 new units of housing in the state of Massachusetts by 2030. Some of them are not going to be in the most optimal location possible, because that's sort of the reality of where we're at right now. We just have to do our best. I mean, I'm not going to sign off on every single project automatically.
Okay.
Certainly, I'm pretty sure everyone on this call was not very happy with the 528 Boylston project, because that's sort of a bizarre location on Route 9 that's hard to get away from. But, as a general principle, I think the point stands.
Great, thank you. Greg Schwartz, I want to give you a chance to respond to that, and I do have a follow-up for you.
Well, Greg, I think that, what you've just heard from my two opponents is just an example of them just willfully ignoring the realities. I hope that I'm wrong. I certainly have no ill will towards the developers. I wish that the traffic on Needham Street and the fact that Rick thinks that people are going to get home and stay home and not have to take their kids to any kind of soccer practice or any kind of other things around town is true. I hope that that's all true. I just, our role at that point in the city council is we're actually charged with considering whether the proposed project will cause more harm to the public ways and to transportation and accessibility or not. And this is an example of them just being ready to believe the developers and try to make excuses for them. They went up we let them go up 8 stories on these big buildings because we wanted to try to reduce the sense of density because they wanted to shoehorn 800 units into this area. And it's just not going to work on that artery. And
Right.
you know what? I appreciate you're asking the question because it's a real good distinction between the three of us. I mean, I am not beholden to the developers. I'm not taking money from the developers. I'm not trying to please them. And this at the state level, this is huge. We need to do state policy that promotes housing. We need to put the cities and towns, and the residents ahead of the profits of the developers.
All right, I'm gonna stop you there. So I want to go back and ask you about state policy, or all of you, but first, Bill Humphrey and then Rick, if you could keep it short.
Yeah, well, I mean, just look, I don't think any developer that's ever met with me has ever thought that I was doing whatever they wanted. Certainly those are, meetings where I'm pushing back on a lot of things and questioning certain things. And if I could wave a magic wand, I wouldn't be doing most of this stuff through the private sector to begin with. But this is the reality that we're operating within, right? We have to acknowledge the reality of how our economy is set up and work with the folks that do these type of things. Although I'd certainly like to see a greater public sector role as well. I mean, I think unfortunately, this is more of what we heard just after the mics got cut off at the league debate, where Dr. Schwartz said it's just politics about the accusations that he was making against the two of us. And I think I can't speak for anyone else, but I'm not prepared to just say anything to get elected. And I don't think we should be making these kind of attacks on each other.
Thank you, Rich Lipoff.
I don't think you can.
Greg, let's go to Rick and then we'll come back to you.
I agree with that as well. I agree with everything that Councilor Humphrey just said, and I want to put something in everybody's ear to think about, and it's off of what Bill just said. I'd love for our government to build affordable housing and housing of all kinds, but the reality is that we don't do that, and we have to partner. And when we need 200,000 units, you can't vilify people that work with developers to build the real estate that we need. So the developer is not the big bad wolf. This is the partnership, the knowledge, and the work that we need to do to get these units done.
Great. So let me, Greg, I'm going to give you a chance to respond, but let me ask you a question on top of that. You've been endorsed by Representative Ruth Balser, which is clearly a feather in your cap, but you've also been endorsed by 8 Newton City councilors who are all well known to be leaning on the housing skeptical side, and some of them have campaigned against the very housing projects that Newton has managed to get through. How do we know you're all in on housing?
Well, Greg, I was going to say, first of all, what Bill said, it's all political, and I'm somehow saying things to get elected. That's no different. I mean, that's not true, and I'm sure Bill is saying all kinds of things that he's trying to get elected. I'm not doing anything that's unsavory, but getting back to the housing issue, I mean, come on, guys. I supported every single project other than Needham Street. I mean, you can't paint me as an anti-housing guy. I mean,
well, how about those endorsements, though? Those endorsements paint you as an anti-housing guy.
Well, Greg, look, you know as well as I do. I mean, you take support where it comes from. People are supporting me because they think that I'm more moderate than these two guys. Of course I am. The fact that I actually had the temerity to vote once against a project probably makes them think, wow, this guy actually is going to give at least a rational thought to whether you support something or not. These guys have never voted against a project. So, so basically, I'm not vilifying everybody. It's all hands on deck. I'm not vilifying developers. But when it comes, I'm a progressive. I grew up in New York City. The developers, you know who the developers were back then, who were kind of taking the neighborhoods and gentrifying them and ruining the Upper West Side of Manhattan? Donald Trump. Okay, it's actually outrageous that our progressive wing of our party is so in the pocket of big business that they'd never even consider that they can criticize them when they don't absolutely, they don't actually have the public's best interest. They give you all kinds of goodies. And in this project, they did Passive House, which was great. And we pushed them to do as much as we could get them to do. And we still couldn't put lipstick on this pig. So that's why I oppose this particular project. I have the independence to do that. I'm saying that my opponents are not ready to do that.
Thank you. Bill Humphrey, Rick Lipoff, what about the endorsements that he's received from your 8 colleagues who tend to be unsupportive of housing? Should voters be worried about that, who care about building more
Well,
housing?
I think, you know what? It's the reality. I live and die by my choices. I put city over self all the time. And I'm taking endorsements from people in a big tent, but people that I respect in every one of their lanes. All of the seated counselors that are on my endorsement page, Greg and I worked with together, and they all are endorsing me. And the ones who are on the council now who've never worked with Greg are endorsing him now. It shows a clear lane that we each have chosen. Now, I'm fine with that. All I care about is my lane and what it speaks to others about what kind of state rep I will be.
Bill Humphrey, I'm going to give you the last word on this, and we'll move on to a different housing question.
Well, again, as I said on the first question, I just have to remind us we're not running for re-election to the Newton City Council here. So, I mean, I'm certainly endorsed by former city councilors Bowman, Noel, and Ryan, who I worked extremely closely with. But I'm also endorsed in this race, which is a significant thing that sets me apart, by the Mass Sierra Club and Progressive Mass, the Mass Nurses Association, 1199 SEIU, SEIU Local 509, the Newton Teachers Association, the Ironworkers, the UAW, Progressive Dems of Massachusetts. A whole bunch of other organizations. These are the organizations that work every day at the State House, lobbying legislators, advancing an agenda. Almost everything that's in my campaign platform on my website is based on a bill that one of these organizations has been sponsoring for years and working with their allies on. These are the important things that we should be focusing on a lot more than these local endorsements and who has what.
So the endorsements do reflect